What separates a good presentation from one that lingers in your audience's memory for years? Now, on today's show, we'll look at the great, the bad, and the ugly of presentations, why some soar, others stumble, and what each can teach us about structure, story, and style. My guest has not only been on stage for decades, he's curated presentations for decades and brings a unique perspective of what makes presentations truly unforgettable. Ready? Let's go. Today's guest, Dana Klein, has over 30 years of experience as a corporate speaker from small groups to the main stage. His presentation style blends academic content with analogies, stories, and with a sprinkling of humor. He looks to the horizon to find topics others aren't covering, with the motto, be unique, offer ideas and topics in ways others aren't providing. I'm going to let him take it from here. Dana Klein, welcome to the show. The floor is yours, sir.
Rob, let me start with the ugly. Back in 1988, I had recently started in a product area at a large financial services firm, and I was put on the road show for a new investment product. This was going to be a killer. Remember, we're coming out of the 1987, end of the world. My manager, taking no chances, handed me a scripted pitch saying, okay, young man, go out there and deliver this. I had my flip chart, back then, nothing else, my notes, and what I thought was a perfect plan. 2 minutes into the first presentation, I froze, completely blank. One guy leaning forward in the audience was like going to feed me my next line. It was a disaster. But that day taught me two lessons. One, I cannot memorize a script. My mind is like a sieve. Two, if I really want to connect with people, I have to practice until it sounds authentic and natural, not like a performance. I'm not an actor. I am Dana Klein, founder of Klein Strategies. I help sales teams and professionals master ethical persuasion and negotiation skills, which foster trust instead of pressure. I'm certified by the Cialdini Institute as a coach and trained in negotiation at the Wharton Business School. But most important, what I teach comes from decades of experience inside firms like Janus Capital, Schwab, American Beacon, and others, learning what truly influences people. In a sense, how do you get them to come your way, to say yes? My speaking style is conversational and interactive with a sprinkling of humor, as you mentioned, and I engage audiences by getting them talking, interacting, laughing, and connecting ideas to their real world challenges, because people don't change just because we tell them. They change through discovery and practice. And my goal is to help professionals discover their true north in communication, aiming to be authentic, persuasive, and memorable.
Well, you went 3 seconds over, but I still loved it. Maybe 2 seconds. That was outstanding. Let me ask you a question, just from what you just delivered, and what you heard him deliver is frequently what we have to deliver when somebody botches our bio, reads something stale from the website, and then we've got to kind of recover. So we got the journey, we got what he offers. I'm curious from your own notes right now, script, sentence outline, word outline, or a little bit of each three?
I found that I try to write things out, but it never works. I never quite get it right. Or I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh, I don't like that word. Let me change it to this one. I'll be changing presentations like 5 minutes before I go on. So what I've learned is use an outline. I have an outline. I know what I want. I keep it more or less in front of me. I do try to memorize most of the key points, but I think, as much of the practice, no more flip charts. This was, we had, not only we also had those acetates, with the overhead projectors.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But, I've moved on. I have a laptop. Hopefully I can connect to a projector of some sort, but a screen. But at the end of the day, even then, know what's on your slide. I mean, I'm big on like transitions, a little bit of movement keeps you going. And sometimes if I don't remember exactly where it is, so I really got to practice. And the
Right.
more I practice, the more I'm not worried about what I'm going to say because I know what I'm going to say. It's like years ago I worked on a series of programs with a couple of guys that work with professional athletes. And what I learned about is muscle memory. If you're working with whether it doesn't matter whether it's tennis or golf or football, you can have your play, but once things start, as Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan until they get smashed in the mouth. How do you recover from that?
Right.
Right? And so you have to know what you're going to say. A lot of times people will say, "Well, how do you think you did?" And I'll be like, "I don't know, I wasn't there." Because I
Right.
was so wrapped up in being the presenter and connecting with the audience that I wasn't quite so aware of every word because I knew what I was going to say already.
Yeah. Let me jump in
That's
for a
really
second,
my
Dana.
style is like, I got to know what I'm going to say because if
Yeah.
I don't, I forget.
Well, so
And
you put some guardrails up.
yeah. And,
Um,
and one thing I learned along
yeah.
the way there, you may have taught me this. The audience doesn't know what you didn't tell
Right. Right.
them. So if you forget something, never stop and say, "Oh yeah," and so
I
you never
normally
want to
do
do that.
this,
You
but I
just keep
forgot it
going.
today.
You
Yeah.
smack yourself in the mouth and you keep going.
Yeah.
That's kind of the way I do it.
I hear you. You hit on a key word there. Of everything, all of it was good. But I tell you the word that resonated in my ears: transitions. So when
Yes.
people are listening right now, we all have our own style. I don't, somebody wants to write out a script, write it out. I'm assuming you're going to back that script down into a sentence outline or a word outline. But what makes a Dana Klein a little bit different than your average speaker is he knows his content. It's moving from piece to piece where we're going to see just how great a speaker he is. So to focus on the transitions, which you mentioned you do,
Yeah.
I just want to reinforce that and say that's what kind of welds everything together when we're talking.
Yes, absolutely. And that's really where I spend more time in a sense in practice, in knowing what's up on the next slide. Yeah, you can have like if you have a big monitor and you have your slides on your laptop, you can see the next one coming up. But you really shouldn't be doing that. Like look at the audience. The other day I did a presentation and it was a big stage, but it was behind me, and I was on the floor. I like to be engaged with the audience, and I had my clicker with the laser beam, you know, but and I actually had it videoed, and I realized that I was turning around to say, "Oh, look at this," and highlighting a word or whatever. Should never do that.
Right.
you know, this absolutely disable the laser button because in order to do that, unless there's an easy way to do it, you really can't. And so that's why I look to create transitions that like highlight the word. Years ago I read a book about, and basically among 700 pages, one of the things it told me is, hey, when you write something, highlight, bold out like a key word, right? Well, you bold it out on your screen. I mean, I'm very big on how many words per slide. I try not to use a lot of words. I'd rather have a picture. I'd like to have some movement. But if you're going to use words and there's a key word to your point, Rob, that would be bolded.
Right. Hey, Dana,
Transition.
have you ever heard of a clicker from Logitech called Spotlight?
I've seen those.
Yeah, it's an
Yeah.
interesting for those who are listening. It's an interesting clicker because it's a little finicky. I've got one, but what
Yes.
I like about it is you can do a few different things, including what you just said, which is instead of a red laser beam, what it does is it basically blows up whatever it's hitting. And it'll only blow up a word or two, but it just
Right.
makes a bubble and makes it big so you can point to it. We'll get to how we position our body in just a second, but it's a really nice device, particularly for you, coming out of the financial industry. A lot of times you got numbers up on those screens, and we've got to show them all the numbers, but we really want them to focus on two or three. It's
Yeah.
nice to bold it, as you said, or maybe spotlight it.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I've seen that. I haven't used it. The problem I have is I don't. like to turn my back to the
Yep.
audience. That's the problem. And it's hard to do them both. You got to do it quick. One thing I learned from that master presenter, Rob Jolles, movement matters. When you're in front of people, there's nothing wrong. I mean, you don't want to be distracting. You don't want people to go, oh my God, I'm going to get seasick. But I think if you move around a little bit, that is really helpful. And I try, and again, this is where I'm practicing. I'm kind of thinking about, well, how am I going to move that I'm not going to make you too seasick, but I may turn around and use the clicker. And I think you're right. I got to go get the spotlight thing. That might be
Well,
one
you'll
of the
like
things.
it. You'll like it. And I
Yeah.
want you to think more like a weatherman, okay, or a
Yeah.
weatherwoman, which is, they've got a green screen behind them and they're gesturing, but they're not really looking back at it. If they did, they wouldn't see anything but a green screen. So
Right.
a lot of times you can, what we're trying not to do is turn it completely and speak to a screen. Now, that's not what we want. But to
Yeah.
shift our shoulders and eyeball it for a second and not lose a lot of language doing it, and then kind of work like a weatherman and just gesture towards it and trust that we're in that area. That's, I think, how we can get the two areas to merge.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of what I'm working on. Is like, well, how do I get away with that without really, turning my back and
Right.
and like you say, just the shoulder and keep going. I like the idea though. I do like the idea of bolding it. I wish I've seen them and I never, it's like, oh, that's more money than the
Oh, they've come
29
down. I think they're
1999
$70
ones.
now.
And
They're not
yeah, I
bad.
know they're reasonable, but
Right.
I haven't, I need to step it up. No more
Step
being
it
cheap.
up, Dana, because little things matter. All right. Now, when I
Exactly.
opened up the show, I said, I gave you an opening, said that you either delivered or, and I really consider this you a valuable resource for me because you used to curate a lot. You'd look at a
Yeah.
lot of presentations and study them and bring some of these consultants in. So, in your mind, what separates a presentation you think that's truly going to stick with one that's, well, it's funny and it's enjoyable, but I don't know what anybody's walking out with. How do you tell the difference?
First of all, I try to do what I used to say was be like you mentioned the word on the horizon. I don't want to be like everybody else. I would literally, people would come to me, hey, could you do a presentation on, I don't know, the weather, right? Well, you can go to the weatherman. There are so many other people that will do that presentation that you're not unique. I think uniqueness is really important because then you become somebody that others want to reach out and find out what else you got because I don't want to be like everybody else. So I will generally look for something that's different. And the reality is you got to constantly be willing to be out there looking for those things that others aren't talking about. I will constantly look through the catalogs at various conferences and things to see, well, what is this guy talking about? And the reality is um, there's only so much you can talk about in the world, but there's always something. There's some way that you can flip it a little bit to become original. Because when you're original and you're unique, people will be more likely to remember you. And hopefully, they're more likely to remember something that you said. I really believe that if you don't leave them with something that they can do on Monday morning, usually you're at a conference and you never know what day you're at, but these things usually run, Monday afternoon to Friday. People leave. What can they do on Monday? And if you can give them one or two things to do on Monday, they'll remember you. And maybe then they want to call you back. Okay, come on in. Let's do a workshop. Great. But when you're doing a keynote, what do you, how much time have you really got? I mean, you're the master of them.
Yeah.
But how much can you really train? I mean, the reality is, you're going to come in and do some kind of training. You really need to kind of whet their appetite.
Right.
And I think if they do something and they try it and it works, they're like, oh, that was good. Let's see what else this guy has. What else is in his little bag of tricks or whatever you want to call it. I don't mean to demean what we do, but it is that people want to know, maybe another way of saying is how many more arrows can you put in my quiver that make me that much better at whatever. And I think that's really, really critical. And part of that is just being different. Don't just be like everybody else that says, "Oh, I can come in and teach you how to present." Well, there's lots of presenters out there. What makes you different? What makes your style different that people say, "Oh, okay, this is a way of doing it that I hadn't really thought about."
Yeah.
Like
And
Hey,
don't be afraid to take risks because I'm going to pick up on something you said earlier,
yeah,
which I don't want to forget, which is as long as we don't tell everybody, well, that didn't work the way I was hoping, nobody really knows or cares. So when we're talking about little things, and it's funny, we're on this Logitech, spotlight clicker, but to
yeah,
me, it is the poster child of the conversation of, oh, right, it's a clicker, but it's a little bit unique and a little bit different than the other 50 clickers that audience is going to see over their lifetime. And you and I think, are both cut from the same cloth, which says, well, I want to try it then. And if it doesn't work, no one's going to know because I'll patch it. I'll figure a way around it. But it's always worth trying because that's what we talked about, the great, the bad, and the ugly. I never heard the word good in there. To get
right.
great, we've got to do things that other people aren't doing.
Yeah, and you have to be willing to fall on your face. I mean, remember, I created a presentation once that we did a survey of rich people. I mean, this was we had to pay people to give us their time, so they were really rich. And I have a guy had a surveyor. He did all this work. We came up with a presentation, and we said, what were the top things that rich people really want, successful people to do, and supporting them. It was like, answer the phone. Brilliant. And at the end of the day, the feedback was, tell me something I don't already know,
Oh,
right? Like I went through training, you go through Xerox training, you go through sales training, wherever, right? Answer the phone. There's a bunch of things. I mean, some of it was reasonably unique, but not really.
yeah.
And I just, it was like, well, put that back on the shelf, forget about it. And literally, it's still there.
Right.
I don't, God knows where it is now. But off of that, I saw a presentation from it's a quick story. It was a guy from Ritz Carlton. I wanted to work with Ritz Carlton. They were like, no, we don't do that. We don't work with people. I found a book in a Ritz Carlton. It's called The New Gold Standard. It's about how Ritz Carlton does exactly what they do to make them memorable. And so I called the author and I said, hey, would you work with me? Of course, I'll work with you. And we wrote a great presentation. We called it The Art of Wow. The name alone was enough to get people to show up at like a keynote. We turned it into a workshop. We turned it into a book. We did all sorts of things off of that basic disaster because the idea was the same, but it's like, how do you create an experience for people that is Ritz Carlton like? And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about financial services or hotel chains or restaurants. I mean, there's plenty of other books like that, but the reality is, and then how do you create that hook that people want to hear it, right? Like, and by the way, you can't trademark wow, it's out there. It's too many people already have it. But how do you do that? And that fact, I love giving that presentation because it was so much fun to talk about what do other people do, to wow their clients.
How long ago did you do that presentation? Do you remember?
When did I do it? It would have been in late 2000s.
Okay.
And
Because
in
I remember
fact,
seeing the presentation and I
yeah,
thought it was a
in fact, I
great
created it,
presentation. Very
and then
creative.
I left the firm, and unfortunately, they through lack of originality, they created the Art of Wow 2.0. Great, you know. See, and that's a perfect example of like, hey, enough.
Right.
Go look for the next thing, right? What's the next big thing? You can't live on your laurels. When I first got out of school, I worked for Chrysler, and there was a guy there by the name of Lee Iacocca, who at the time was infamous, who saved the company. But he used to say, in this business, if you slow down, you're going to get run over. And that's another thing I never forgot. You've got to constantly be looking, what's the next iteration of what you're doing? How can maybe you change the title? What else can you add to it? We had flop, we turned it into wow. Now what? What other things can you do to make your presentations that you make? I mean, look, I look at your books. How many do you have now? And each one is no longer, well, let me tell you about customer-centered selling. It's other things. It's persuading. It's, all these elements that just sort of take, that you're the master of this. To me, you're sort of like, well, I don't know, maybe you're my muse. I don't know. You really keep
Flattered.
me thinking about, well, what's the next thing that I can do? that will be a little bit more unique, a little bit different, that's out there on the horizon, and that people will want to hear.
Yep, and it's about taking risks. It
Yeah,
really is. It's funny. I listen to you, and I'm always smile because I find you to be a pretty funny guy.
yeah,
And now we talk about humor for a moment because
yeah.
it's a tricky territory.
It
And
is.
everybody wants to be funny. I maintain, how about be interesting? And if and there are many ways to do that. But what's your philosophy on using humor effectively without having it backfire on people?
That's a tough one because it has. There's another bad story. Well, I don't have a story about bad, but I think you have to be careful. I mean, my sense of humor and my wife's sense of humor are different. So I try things out under her. And if she really hates it, sometimes if she really hates it, I'm like, I'm going with it, But usually she tamps me down a little bit. I do think I think humor is also helpful because people are more likely to remember and stay engaged. But I do think you got to really be careful. I'm more likely to use self-deprecating humor. And I've had people say, well, you really shouldn't do that because then, it reflects poorly on you. And it's like, well, so what? You, what's new?
It depends on
Um,
where it is, Dana. Let
yeah,
me just butt in for just 2 seconds.
yeah, yeah,
The
no, no,
very first book I ever wrote, it was a presentation skills book, and I loved it. And the very first story I told in the preface was me screwing up. Okay, and I won't even go into the story. I literally got on the wrong airplane in Atlanta. Okay, and missed my flight. Blah blah blah. Anyway, my New York editor in that strong New York accent said, all I know is I'm 2 pages into the story and you're like a schmuck that doesn't know how to catch a plane. And I went, well, and so what I learned from that was, oh, I can be self-deprecating, but I have to pick my spots and I'm certainly not going
yeah,
to lead with it. I want the audience in my hand before I tell them I mess up. That was a story I never
yeah.
forgot.
Yeah, I'm more likely. My self-deprecation is more of like, something simple. I don't want to be too funny because I think what happens when you do that is funny can be like in a sense, with my better half. Sometimes it's not as funny as you thought it was because I
Yeah.
think it's funny. That doesn't mean everybody does. So I've learned over time, it's just a simple word, it's a phrase, it's a way of sort of, just keeping people on their seat. I'm not going to be Don Rickles, hey, what are you sleeping for? Never going to do anything like that in the audience. But it is a way of keeping people engaged because when they laugh, there's all these things with endorphins and everything, and regardless, the fact is that it keeps them awake.
Yeah.
And it's just like you learn about well, how you change your pitch and your speed, and how you slow down a little bit, how you whisper to be a better presentation whisperer, and sometimes how you have to yell and carry on. So to me, that's an added element that's really, really important. And, I listened to your first podcast, was about humor. I
Right.
listened to the one you did with your son, Danny.
Right.
And I mean, believe me, I wish I could be funny. I've had people say, you're so funny, you should do stand up. It's like, well, stand up is a whole lot different than me, standing up here telling you about, some other investment product
Yeah.
or whatever. Um, but I do think there are good times when humor really works,
Yeah,
and
it
that's
gets us.
kind
It
of
can get us in trouble, get us
yeah,
out of trouble. For those who don't know, my son Danny is a stand-up comic. That's what Dana's referred to, and
yeah,
he makes a business out of it, and he's real good at it. But I want to stay on this for a second because I'll tell you a little tip that while you were talking, I reminded
yeah,
myself. A lot of the humor, and Dana and I have have similar styles. We don't walk up there and go, two guys will walk down the street, and that's not our form of humor. We're not telling jokes. But
right,
sometimes funny things happen. Sometimes and frequently they happen organically. And what I learned to do early on in my career was when I organically struck on something, I stopped believing that I was going to remember it 3 hours later and write it down. I kept a little notepad up there and I would sort of misdirect the audience to look at something while I just put 2 or 3 words down. Because to me, I didn't want to lose that moment. And they weren't all gold, but it's how I started kind of being able to place in things that I thought would work that I've now tested accidentally in front of an audience. And they won't necessarily happen by accident unless I do it again and there's no noise. And then I might
Yeah.
see me just draw a little line through my,
Oops.
but it's not an accident.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, I don't keep a notebook because I'm too easily distracted, and I probably wouldn't go, "Hey, look at the birdie," and then write something down. I wouldn't think to do that, but I tend to do it afterwards. I try, some success, sometimes more successfully than others, to do in a sense an after action of what I've done. And I always try to come up with, okay, what did I like? What didn't I like? I mean, I have to say, nothing's ever perfect, and I'm never going to be perfect, but I'm going to try. And I do tend to like make some notes about how that went and what did I like. I mean, if I can remember that line, or I can remember, try this next time, I'll try that out now. I write it down. So I go back, and sometimes I even go back to my presentation and I create, version 5, and then add that slide or that phrase into a slide to go back and take a look at it. And that may ultimately wind up being, the next final product. But at least I have it. I try to keep that in, essentially while it's fresh, because my mind is like a sieve and I won't remember it by, but after dinner, it's like, well, that was great. What's for dessert? And after dessert, I can't remember that we had coffee or not. So,
Yeah, no, it's like a dream with me. You
yeah,
wake up at 3 in the morning and go, "Ooh, that was a great dream." I don't have to write that down. I'll remember it. And at 7 in the morning or 6:30, you wake up and all you know is you had a good dream. That's
right.
what was starting to plague me on
Yeah,
stages of I'll definitely remember this. And when I got to the plane, all I know is there was something I definitely wanted to remember. And so
right.
that's what makes me trigger and just throw a
Yeah,
couple of words down. But that
yeah,
everybody has their own unique style. Let's
yeah.
talk about from a curating side.
Mhm.
You've looked at a lot of presenters.
Yeah,
What are some of the specific things that you look for that tell you that somebody has really mastered this? Everybody has a website, everybody has a book, but when you watch, you go, "Oh, that's the real deal." Give me a couple tips on that, and I want people to listen real
yeah.
carefully right
No,
now.
that's a really good point, because honestly, and maybe it's just because of me, and I look at people like you, and I'm like, well, there's not a lot of really good people out there. Um, I always think about it in terms of like job interviews. Well, that guy, what a schmuck, but boy, he interviews well. Look where he's, traveling up the food chain, the line. So when I look at presenters, I look at a couple things, because I do think about like, okay, are they really being authentic? Um, one of the things that drives me crazy, which is not great, is um, what I call the curse of knowledge. You know what? People can't remember everything. And there's so many of these speakers that want to tell you everything. And every once in a while, you come across somebody that knows how to create an analogy or a story that takes the point and just nails it. And I usually I'll write something down about that as well. I usually have a little book in front of me, and I'll write that down as well. And I'm not even sure that I'll ever be able to use it or the idea, but it's that person that can really explain something that's a little bit unique or a little bit esoteric, and give me an analogy that's like, oh, I gotta say that was pretty good. I'm gonna try that again. So, or I'm gonna try that one out. So I look for authenticity. I look for somebody that knows how to be, maintain the right pace, that that has the right levels of inflection, that keeps me, at the edge of my seat. I'm waiting to hear what's the next thing they're going to say. When I'm sitting there going, yeah, all right, I know what you're going to say next. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for that person who's really going to be different, and keep me engaged. And so that's kind of what I look for. And I've seen, it's funny. I go to this thing in I live in Charlotte, and we have a thing here through a local college called Senior Scholars. And believe me, we're all seniors. Uh, I'm I'm like, I'm one of the youngsters, because I am not, I'm
You're a
not
young
pushing
senior.
my.
Got it.
I got to. I mean, literally, they line up. When I was a kid, we'd go to like Disney, and everybody lines up their strollers right outside the ride. These people, they have their walkers lined up. But
Uh,
anyway, some of these speakers are fabulous, And most of them are like, well, okay, well, I gotta go. I can't make it through it. And it could be a great topic, but I saw one guy recently. One person worked for the government. He had little time off because of what's going on. He came and he spoke, talking about his department, and it was, as you would expect, not very fun. But then I saw another one by a person who works for an energy group, and it was fabulous. I learned so many things, and that's another thing I'm looking for. What can you teach me that I don't already know? Now I don't
Right.
know a whole lot about energy, other than I plug something in and the light should come on, and if it doesn't, well, that's a problem. I got to go. Now what? But learning where all that comes from was really fascinating.
Yeah.
So that's another thing. That to me is that unique topic that other people aren't talking about.
Right. Right.
That
Yeah,
really gets my
I think it's
attention.
four pillars. I'm trying to get them in my head what they would be. But I know one thing, and they can be in any order they want, except for the first one, which has to be information.
Yeah,
My son is a comic. He doesn't have to provide any information. When I do auctions, I'm providing information, but it's a completely different form of information. But when a company is bringing in a speaker to talk about X, information's the most important part. Then comes entertainment. Then comes motivation. Then comes inspiration. They're all wonderful. Put them in those three in any order you want, and leave them out. And I think you're going to have a weaker presentation. But I always fear, unless we're dinner entertainment, that we're going to heavy up on all the bells and whistles and the shtick and the humor and forget that that's a group at their year-end meeting that came to learn how to sell more or to work with their
right.
customers more effectively. And you told them you were going to get to the art of wow, and they heard the art of humor.
Yeah. No, that's really critical. I mean, you need to tell them what, I have in my outline. I know what I'm going to teach you, right? The humor is just sprinkled in. It's a sprinkling of humor. You said it, I've said it. It's not, a fire hose of humor. It's, a little bit here and a little bit there, and then we get back. The flip side of that, though, is like I mentioned, sometimes you have a lot you want to cover, and the reality is they're not going to digest it. You have to be really careful knowing where you're really going overboard on the information without the application. Really, and that's something, again, I hate to keep blowing smoke, but I learned a lot of that from you, because not only do you provide me with information, um, you're also showing me how to apply that information. And you have to be able to kind of pace yourself, because sometimes you have something that's relatively technical, or I'm talking about the science of psychology and the research that's gone into whatever, and the reality is, look, it doesn't really matter. What people really want is, well, how do I apply this,
Right.
right? How do I do it? I need to understand foundationally what it is, but after that, it's like, how do I internalize that? And you're not going to internalize how the brain works. What you're going to internalize is, have you tried this? Have you tried that? This is something you could do. That's and that's where you have to balance that. And that's really sometimes very tough when you have a lot of good information. What do you leave on this? What do they say in films? What winds up on the cutting room floor? You have to really be willing to do that.
Right.
Um, and no matter how much you think you're helping, you're really not, because they're
Right.
never going to remember it anyway on Monday morning.
Right. And I love the point. I love that point you just made. And the part that they get that's I'm gonna say it scares me. I'm not I fear no man or presentation, but I fear a few audiences. Okay. And so sometimes I'm not gonna call out a part of the country, but maybe it rhymes with mid-zest. But we're out there somewhere, and we go in and we got a nice rhythm ready to roll, and the audience is just dead. They're
Yeah,
just not engaged. How do you adjust your style on the fly
I
when
yell
you
louder.
realize? And then what?
See, there's some humor. Um, no, I have a tendency then. Well, I do a couple things. One, I'll ask some questions. It's
Smart.
it's very hard sometimes, and usually before I go in, I've tried to speak with whoever is. I don't like, usually if it's a really big group, there's like somebody whose business is to get the whole thing together and bring everybody in. That's not the person I want to talk to. whoever is really in charge of the group. And I want to know what's going on. And so I try to build a relationship with them. And so then I may start with a question. Rob, when we were talking yesterday, I really appreciate the time. And you said whatever. And I'll ask a question that elicits a response from you. And that starts to, I think that warms the audience up a little bit because, oh, okay, he called on him. God, I better pay attention because he'll call on me next, right? So there's a little bit of that, create a little fear. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because you know how, and I know that, lots of speakers will say, well, who here in the audience, and has I fear that personally. You talk about fearing no man, because you never know. You get one or two types of people. You get the sniper, and then you get the know-it-all. And I don't want those guys yet. I might bring them in later, but I don't want to start with those people.
Right.
So I like to bring in somebody I know, and then I try to engage with them. Sometimes I'll even say, hey, look, I'm going to ask you this question. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to put you, so you're not on the spot because you're going to be on the spot. I try to do that. And then, I will ask sort of generic questions. People raise your hands, don't raise your hands, but it gets some engagement.
The
Uh,
rhetoricals are great, Dana. It's so
yeah,
smart. Again, I would just want to, I'm not even adding to that. I want to highlight what you just said, which is rather than panic and dig in harder and God forbid, get a little bit ticked off at that audience, uh, ask them some questions.
mm,
The difference between a keynote and a workshop is really important in this particular scenario because if it's a keynote, we can't do a whole lot. But then again, there's that wall that's kind of up between us and the audience. If it's a workshop, we can slow down and maybe, put a little bit of air under that icebreaker that we maybe
yeah,
rush through or we're thinking of
right.
rushing through, but spend some time and let them get to know each other and crawl before we walk. I've seen too many presenters look at their watch and go, I don't have a whole lot of time for an icebreaker. Well, you got 3 hours or a half a day, full day. Go ahead and rush through that icebreaker if you think that's the best use of your time, but you'll be fighting it for the next 6 hours.
Yeah, and like, honestly, usually I'm not in front of a group. Yeah, I mean, not that everybody knows everybody, but I'm sort of like I'm not a big believer in the icebreaker thing of stand up and tell yourself about whatever. No, I'm going to try to break the ice on me, and that's where I might start with a little bit of humor or like the other day. One of the things I've learned, two things, because we only got so much time. One is the reality is doing your own introduction is you're blowing your horn. Like I almost thought of saying, Rob, when you and I were at the Fermi Lab and we were teaching them how to, get crack atoms together. I never did that, right? But then you're just tooting your own horn, and people hate that. So
Yeah.
I have a tendency to ask somebody to intro me. Well, doesn't always work. I was at a presentation the other day where I had handed them like, here's a piece of paper, read this, or here's the outline for it. And they were like, oh, I left the paper at home. They literally sat up and they said, well, I left Dana's bio at home, but he's a really good guy and you're gonna love him. I'm like,
That would be a dream scenario for me. I
and
wish
I
people would leave my bio at home, Dana. And I got to
well,
start
see,
wrapping us down now. So hang
yeah, yeah,
tight.
yeah. But I basically said, well, thank you very much. I'm not a big believer in bios either.
Yeah.
So, but I did ask Ann to help out, and she did,
Right.
that kind of thing.
Right.
So, and that got a little bit of that was kind of funny, and
Yeah.
that got the audience going, and we
Yeah.
and we kind of went from there. So that's kind of what I
Good.
like to do.
Good.
Is
Good. Good.
I don't
Good.
believe in I don't believe in long bios, but I do believe that to a degree, you don't want to be tooting your own horn. You want somebody else tooting it for you and you did a great job. That's all I needed. And
Right.
then we
Right.
went into
I'll
some
take it
other
from
things,
here.
but
I hear
yeah,
you. I'll agree to disagree on the icebreakers, and I agree to disagree because it's going to
okay,
depend on the audience. If they all
yeah,
know each other, which frequently they know everyone except you, then I don't have to spend a whole lot of time with them introducing themselves to each other. But when you're with an audience, a Vistage audience as an example, an audience where you have different people from different organizations, if you don't warm them up, it's gonna be a long presentation.
yeah,
So it'll depend. But I gotta bring us to a head now. So tell me
yeah,
this, Dana Klein,
yes.
how do people get a hold of you?
Well, couple things.
All
One,
right.
I have a website, Klein Strategies, klein-strategies.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm not, I don't look at LinkedIn notoriously all the time, but, so if you send me a message, I'll find it. But if you send me an email, Dana at klein-strategies.com, you will get a response pretty darn quickly. And that's probably the best way. So, email, LinkedIn, website, you name it. There's a calendar on the website. There's a calendar. If you send me an email, there's a calendar link on there as well. We can always set up a time to talk. Um, I would love any opportunity. The one thing I would say, Rob, what I learned is I love to get up and speak in front of an audience. Maybe I should have been that comedian, because I could never be an actor and I could never be on Broadway. God forbid I wouldn't remember 5 lines. But but I do like getting up and talking to organizations and groups. The other thing is I do a lot of coaching. I mean, sometimes just even one-on-one or one on like 4 or 5 people or whatever, I just find that to be really, really helpful to
Yeah.
them. And
Right.
it really engages me as well. So there's a lot of things that I can do for anybody. It's
Right.
not
And
just
and
because I
and
was in
Dana,
financial
if I can,
services.
I'll toot your horn for a second. What makes Dana unique is guys like me, I'm looking at the audience. I'm not looking at a whole lot of other speakers. Dana has been in the pit on both sides of this. He's spoken for decades. He's curated and brought presentations in. So I think it'd be very valuable to get some coaching tips from me. And I'm glad that you put your shingle out there. Dana, it's
Yeah,
been a pleasure talking to you.
always.
Dana and I have known each other for, I'm thinking, 30 something years.
I'm
So
thinking
this is
like
not a guy I know
1992,
casually.
maybe. When did you leave? When did you end
33
being a
years after I
hero?
left Xerox, I knew you a few years before. So we
Yeah,
have known each other for quite some time, and
good.
he is the real deal. Dana Klein, thank you so much for being on the show. It's
Rob,
been a
it
pleasure.
is it is a pleasure, and I have to say thank you. I feel so blessed that I'm in the core of your presentation whisperers.
Oh, yeah,
Thank you.
you bet. All right,
You
folks, we'll
bet.
do it again as well as we can next time. Until then, stay safe.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please follow, rate, and review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. For more resources and to connect with Rob, visit thepresentationwhisperer.com.